The lead up to the Voice to Parliament referendum, a Labor MP has penned a book reflecting on one Indigenous man's own cultural clash. Graham Perrett has teamed up with Wayne Long, who has both Kamilaroi and Chinese heritage, on the long story that reflects the intersection of those cultures and also talks about how the voice might have an effect on all of this. Joining me live is Labor MP and author Graham Perrett. Thanks for your time. It's an interesting cultural combination, I suppose, if I can call it that. Talk us briefly what you learnt going on this journey yourself as the author.
Thanks, Tom. So Wayne Long and I grew up in the little country town of St George. Played footy together, went to school together, known each other all our lives. We're both from big families, so interconnected families as well. And I just knew him as Wayne and always thought of him as a sort of a Murray, a Kamilaroi bloke. But he also had this Chinese heritage. And then when I became an MP, I represent a huge Mandarin-speaking community, and so got sort of investigating some of the history of my own community. And Wayne was the mechanism. By looking at his life, focusing on the one, I was able to tell the story of the many and that interconnection between First Nations communities and the Chinese diaspora that's been coming here since 1818 and maybe even before, and those strong connections that were often made outside of townships, outside those boundary streets, where there were often the nighttime curfews in country towns or cities, and some sort of new dynasties formed through those communities. And Wayne Long's story is just one of those stories.
I guess it sort of speaks to the fact that when we talk about the gap, it's sort of like, well, let's just create better outcomes. There's more funding there. Why isn't it working? That there's such a long and troubled history for a lot of people that goes from generation to generation, which is part of why this has been such an intractable problem.
Well, look, it is. And in Wayne's story, there are some tears. Wayne's not in this interview because he's a farm worker out in country Queensland, as he has been for 30 plus years since he left school. But there are some endemic problems, I guess, or almost hereditary problems. In Wayne's family, that hasn't been the case. His family story is perhaps influenced by his circumstances as well, but the voice would be. I've given. Wayne lived it. Wayne told it. I wrote it. Our book tells his story. It gives him a voice that wasn't in the history books I read when I was in primary school. But Wayne's version of the voice, giving him a voice, is on a broader scale what we would hopefully do if the Australian people support this change to our constitution, a document that doesn't recognise First Nations people, a document that was deliberately designed to exclude, Chinese people, Indian people, Afghan Kamilaroi, and First Nations people when it was designed by, the founding fathers back in the 1890s.
Well, it's interesting to touch on that. There are some people that think that recognition, including actually Warren Mundine, that it shouldn't recognise all Australians specifically in that manner. I do digress. What do you make of the prospects then? Because your state is often mentioned early on as less likely to support the voice. Has there been a bit of an inherent failure from those prosecuting the case for the voice because of this? Because it seems to have come down to mainly progressives versus conservatives, and when they're the battle lines for a referendum, that referendum tends to fail in Australia.
That is the history. The 8 out of 44, if you don't have the bipartisan support, it is tougher. And also remember, no was out of the blocks early. The Nationals said no before they even knew the words. One Nation was always going to say no. And Peter Dutton fell in behind Pauline Hanson and the Nationals. So you got 3 national no cases being led by Queenslanders. That's going to always make it hard in Queensland to get up. We've only got 5 Labor seats out of 30 in terms of those campaigning for. I know there'll be a few LNP that are sort of running dead because they do support or are more supportive of it, can I say. But it will be hard in Queensland. We've got those double belts and braces, I guess, in terms of you got to get 50% of Australians plus one, and then at least 4 out of the 6 states. So it will be hard for us to get up. But I'm I've been doing a lot of work with my grassroots community people who are behind it, and we've had some very positive outcomes. Certainly multicultural groups in my very multicultural electorate are very much on board. But we've got a lot of work to do. There's a lot of misinformation out there. It was out of the blocks very early, and no is just about the status quo. They can confuse on saying it's not far enough on the left and too far on the right, and everything else in between, just to confuse and maintain that no. Yes, will be a harder case to pitch, but I'm optimistic. I've got a forum with Noel Pearson next month. All the forums I've had, people have come away, gone in sceptical and came out, some as converts, willing to campaign for it, and certainly most people have come out saying, all right, well, I better understand it and the rubbish that was swirling around out there. They've now got that booklet through coming through their mailboxes. They'll have more logical ways to understand this will not take anything away from any Australian. And every Prime Minister since John Howard in 2007 has supported that recognition. They should get on board.
Albeit, there is still plenty of debate around what it might do legally. We've got to leave it there. We might pick that up on another day because we've got to get to a break. We are standing by to hear live from the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers.
Thanks, Tom.